For years, I've carried this weight in silence. Some secrets become part of who you are, like breathing or the steady rhythm of your heartbeat. Mine is a story I never thought I'd tell. I was 34 when I first met Jake Mitchell. Back then, I was still trying to piece my life together after a failed modeling career and a string of toxic relationships. Richard Mitchell seemed like my chance at stability. He was successful, charming, and promised me the kind of life I'd always dreamed of. But life has a way of surprising you. Sometimes the biggest surprises come in the form of a 19-year-old boy with his father's eyes and a soul that seemed as lost as mine. I remember the first time I saw Jake. It was at Richard's welcome home party, celebrating his release and his return to the business world. Jake stood in the corner, looking uncomfortable in his tailored suit. He had this way of observing everyone, like he was trying to figure out who was genuine and who was just there for show. I understood that look all too well. I'd worn it myself for years in the modeling industry. Richard introduced us with his usual flair for dramatics. "Sarah, this is my son Jake. Jake, meet the woman who's given me a reason to start over." Jake's handshake was firm, but his eyes were guarded. He'd been through so much already, shuffled between foster homes while his father served time for fraud. His mother, Diana, was barely a presence in his life, lost to her own demons and addiction. I wanted to reach out, to tell him I understood what it was like to feel abandoned. But I held back, knowing my role as his father's girlfriend required certain boundaries. Those first few months were a delicate dance. Richard was busy rebuilding his architecture firm, often working late into the night. Jake was struggling with his college applications, torn between staying in LA or escaping to the East Coast. I found myself spending more time with him than I'd expected. It started with simple things, helping him with his college essays, discussing books we both loved. He introduced me to indie bands I'd never heard of. I showed him my favorite foreign films. We'd sit in the home theater late at night, analyzing characters and plot twists. Richard was always too tired for movies, but Jake shared my passion for storytelling. I told myself it was normal, this connection. I was just being a good stepmother to be. But there were moments when I caught myself staring at him too long. Moments when our hands would brush reaching for the popcorn, and I'd feel electricity shoot through my body. I tried to ignore these feelings, buried them deep beneath layers of guilt and denial. The wedding was a lavish affair, exactly as Richard had planned. Jake stood beside his father as best man, looking more handsome than any 19-year-old had a right to. When he gave his speech, his words were perfect, funny, touching, everything a son should I about his father's happiness. But his eyes kept finding mine in the crowd. And I knew, even then, that we were playing with fire. After the honeymoon, life settled into a routine. Richard traveled more for work, expanding his firm to new cities. Jake decided to stay local for college, studying art at UCLA. He'd come home most weekends, claiming he missed his old room. But we both knew he came back for our conversations. For those quiet moments when the house felt too big and too empty. I started looking forward to his returns more than I should have. The way his face would light up when he saw me. The sound of his laughter echoing through the house. The way he really listened when I talked about my dreams, my fears. One night, everything changed. I was driving home from a charity event when another car ran a red light. The impact wasn't severe, but it left me shaken. Jake was the one who came to the hospital. Richard was in New York, closing a major deal. He called to check on me, promised to catch the next flight home. But it was Jake who stayed with me all night. Jake, who held my hand when the pain medication made me dizzy. Jake, who whispered stories to keep me distracted. When he finally drove me home the next morning, something had shifted between us. The pretense of stepmother and stepson felt paper thin. We were just two people who understood each other in ways no one else did. A week later, it was raining. I was sitting in the kitchen, watching the storm through the window. Jake came in, soaked from running from his car to the house. His white t-shirt clung to his body, and his hair was dripping. He looked at me with those intense eyes of his, and I couldn't look away. "Sarah," he said, my name like a prayer on his lips. I knew I should leave the room. I knew I should maintain the boundaries that were already crumbling. But I couldn't move. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps. His hand cupped my face, gentle but sure. When his lips met mine, it felt like coming home. It felt like every romance novel I'd ever read. It felt wrong and right and terrible and perfect all at once. I pulled away first, reality crashing back like a tidal wave. "We can't," I whispered, but my hands were still clutching his shirt. "I know," he said, but he kissed me again. And I let him. That kiss opened a door we couldn't close. We tried to fight it, to maintain normal family appearances. But every shared glance held new meaning. Every accidental touch sparked with possibility. We started finding reasons to be alone together. I'd help him with his art projects. He'd help me organize charity events. We'd go to obscure art galleries and indie film festivals. Places where Richard would never think to look. The guilt was constant, a living thing that grew with every stolen moment. I'd look at Richard across the dinner table and hate myself. He was a good man, despite his past mistakes. He didn't deserve this betrayal. But I couldn't stop. Jake had awakened something in me I thought had died years ago. A passion for life, for art, for possibility. When I was with him, I wasn't just Richard Mitchell's trophy wife. I was Sarah, the woman who dreamed of painting, who loved foreign films, who could spend hours discussing philosophy. We were careful, so careful. Never meeting in public places where we might be recognized. Always having plausible explanations for our time together. But living a double life takes its toll. I started having trouble sleeping. Jake's grades began to slip. We were both living on the edge of a knife, knowing that at any moment everything could fall apart. And still, we couldn't stop. One afternoon, we were in my studio, the room Richard had built for me when we got married. I was showing Jake how to blend colors on canvas. He stood behind me, his chest pressed against my back, his hands covering mine as we moved the brush together. The painting was forgotten as he kissed my neck. I turned in his arms, and we lost ourselves in each other. We didn't hear the front door open. Didn't hear the footsteps on the stairs. It wasn't until Richard's voice boomed through the house that we realized our time had run out. "Sarah? Are you home? I thought we could have lunch." We sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Jake grabbed his backpack while I straightened my clothes. By the time Richard reached the studio, we were standing a respectable distance apart. But something in his expression told me he'd seen something. A shadow of suspicion crossed his face. That night, I lay awake beside my husband, wondering how much longer we could keep up this charade. Wondering if the happiness I felt with Jake was worth the pain we were causing. Wondering if there was any way this story could end that didn't destroy us all. I didn't know then that everything was about to unravel. That our carefully constructed world of secrets and lies was balanced on a precipice. That one small mistake would send it all crashing down. But that's the thing about forbidden love. It burns so bright, so hot, that it blinds you to the destruction it leaves in its wake. And we were already burning. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed. Richard had already left for work, his side of the bed cold. My phone buzzed with a message from Jake. "I miss you. Can we talk?" Those 4 words sent my heart racing. We'd been getting careless, letting our emotions override our caution. I knew we should stop, take a step back. But instead, I found myself typing, studio. 2 p.m. The hours crawled by like molasses. I tried to busy myself with household tasks, with charity event planning. But my mind kept drifting to Jake. To the way his eyes lit up when he looked at me. To the way his hands felt on my skin. When he arrived, he looked troubled. "I can't keep lying to him," he said as soon as the door closed. "He's my father, Sarah. And what we're doing." I knew he was right. The guilt was eating away at both of us. But the thought of ending this, of never touching him again, made my chest ache. "Maybe we should tell him," I whispered, not really meaning it. Jake's laugh was bitter. "Tell him what? That his wife and son are in love? That we've been sneaking around behind his back?" Love. We'd never used that word before. It hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. "Is that what this is?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He crossed the room in 2 strides, taking my face in his hands. "You know it is," he said, and kissed me. We lost ourselves in each other again. Every kiss felt like a confession. Every touch like a promise we couldn't keep. When we finally pulled apart, I saw tears in his eyes. "We can't keep doing this," he said, but his hands were still on my waist. "I know," I replied, but I was already leaning in for another kiss. That's when we heard the car door slam. Richard wasn't supposed to be home for hours. Panic seized my chest as footsteps approached the studio. Jake and I separated, trying to look casual. But we'd left evidence of our passion. My lipstick was smeared. His shirt was wrinkled. And the look in our eyes. Richard took one look at us and knew. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as understanding dawned on his face. Followed by disbelief. Then rage. "How long?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Neither of us answered. "How long?" he roared. "Dad," Jake started, stepping forward. "Don't," Richard cut him off. "Don't you dare call me that. Not after this." He turned to me, his eyes filled with hurt and betrayal. "I gave you everything," he said. "A home. A family. My trust." "Richard, please," I began, but he held up his hand. "With my own son," he continued, his voice breaking. "My own flesh and blood." The pain in his voice was unbearable. I wanted to explain, to make him understand. But how do you explain something you don't fully understand yourself? "Get out," he said quietly. "Both of you. Get out of my house." Jake tried to speak again, but Richard's fist connected with the wall. The sound echoed through the studio like a gunshot. We left separately. Jake to his dorm room. Me to a hotel. That night, I lay in an unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling. My phone was flooded with missed calls from friends who'd heard. News travels fast in our social circle. But the only message I cared about was from Jake. "I'm sorry. For everything." I typed and deleted a dozen responses. What could I say? That I was sorry too? That despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to regret what we had? That I loved him, but the cost was too high? In the end, I didn't respond at all. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Richard filed for divorce. His lawyer was ruthless, threatening to expose the affair if I fought for anything. I didn't fig. I didn't want his money. I just wanted the pain to stop. Jake tried to see me several times. But I avoided him. We'd caused enough damage. I heard through mutual friends that he'd transferred to NYU. Running away, just like I was. I threw myself into my art. Painted canvas after canvas of stormy skies and broken things. My agent said they were my best work yet. Pain sells, she said, not knowing how right she was. 6 months later, I had my first solo show. The gallery was packed with LA's art elite. I stood among my paintings, accepting congratulations and fielding questions. Pretending I was okay. That's when I saw him. Jake stood in front of my largest piece. A painting of 2 hands almost touching, but not quite. He'd grown thinner, more serious. New York had changed him. Or maybe it was what we'd done. Our eyes met across the room. For a moment, I was back in that kitchen during the rainstorm. Back when one kiss changed everything. He gave me a sad smile and walked out. I didn't follow. Sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes the price is too high. Sometimes all you can do is learn to live with the choices you've made. I heard Richard remarried last month. A woman his own age, with grown children of her own. I hope he's happy. He deserves that much. Jake is finishing his degree in New York. His art is getting noticed. I see his name in magazines sometimes. I wonder if he still thinks of me. If he remembers our late-night conversations. Our shared love of obscure films. The way we fit together so perfectly, despite everything. I wonder if he regrets it. I don't. Not really. The pain we caused was unforgivable. The trust we broke can never be repaired. But for a brief moment, I knew what it was like to be truly seen. To be understood completely. To love without boundaries or conditions. Even if it was wrong. Even if it couldn't last. Even if it destroyed everything in its path. Some people spend their whole lives searching for that kind of connection. I found it in the wrong person at the wrong time. And now I live with the consequences. Every day, I paint my memories onto canvas. Turn my guilt into art. Transform my pain into something beautiful. It's not redemption. But maybe it's a start. Last night, I dreamed of the kitchen again. Of rain against windows and first kisses. I woke up reaching for someone who wasn't there. It's been 2 years since everything fell apart. 2 years of rebuilding, of learning to live with the echoes of what we did. My art has taken off in ways I never expected. Critics call my work raw and emotionally charged. If they only knew the truth behind each brushstroke. I've moved to Seattle now. The constant rain suits my mood. My gallery shows sell out consistently. I'm successful, by any measure. But sometimes, late at night, I still check Jake's Instagram. He's graduating from NYU next month. His thesis exhibition is ing buzz in all the right places. His work has changed, grown darker and more complex. Like mine, it speaks of loss and forbidden things. I wonder if his audience knows what inspires him. If they can read our story in his paintings like I can. Yesterday, I received an invitation to his graduation show. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for hours before I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. I still miss our conversations. J. 5 words that shattered my carefully constructed peace. I shouldn't go. We've both worked too hard to move forward. But my fingers are already searching for flights to New York. Some pulls are too strong to resist. The gallery is in Chelsea, sleek and modern. I arrive late, hoping to blend into the crowd. But as soon as I step inside, I feel his presence. Jake stands across the room, surrounded by admirers. He's grown into himself these past 2 years. More confident, more assured. Then he looks up and sees me. Time stops, just like it always did. He excuses himself from his group and walks over. You came, he says simply. Your work is beautiful, I reply, professional and distant. But we both hear what isn't said. He leads me through the exhibition. Each piece tells a story only we understand. A woman's silhouette in a studio doorway. 2 coffee cups on a kitchen counter. A rumpled bed with morning light streaming in. Our history, transformed into art. We should talk, he says finally. We end up at a small coffee shop nearby. It's late, and we're almost alone. I saw Dad last month, he tells me. My heart clenches at the mention of Richard. He's happy now, with Caroline. I nod, grateful that at least someone found peace. And you? I ask. Are you happy? Jake's laugh is soft and sad. I'm different, he says. Stronger maybe. But happy? He shakes his head. I tried dating, he continues. Nothing serious. Me too, I admit. We both know why it never worked. I'm moving to Berlin, he says suddenly. Got a residency at a prestigious gallery. My heart sinks and soars simultaneously. Further away. Safer. That's wonderful, I say, meaning it. He reaches across the table, takes my hand. The touch is electric, just like always. Come with me, he whispers. For a moment, I let myself imagine it. Us in Berlin, free from our past. Starting fresh where no one knows our story. But some mistakes shouldn't be repeated. We can't, I say, pulling my hand away. We'd just be running. He knows I'm right. We sit in silence, letting the moment pass. Outside, New York continues its endless rush. I never regretted it, he says finally. Not even when everything fell apart. Me neither, I admit. But that doesn't make it right. We leave the coffee shop as dawn breaks. Stand awkwardly on the sidewalk. Everything and nothing left to say. Take care of yourself, Sarah, he says. Kisses my cheek softly. Then he's gone, swallowed by the city. I fly back to Seattle that afternoon. Return to my rain-soaked life. My art. My solitude. But something has shifted. Like a wound finally healing. I paint through the night. Create something new. Not about pain or guilt or forbidden love. But about forgiveness. About letting go. About finding peace with the choices we make. Maybe that's all we can ask for. Not to forget. Not to erase what happened. But to learn from it. To grow. To understand that some loves aren't meant to last. They're meant to change us. To break us open. To show us who we really are. Jake's invitation sits on my desk. A reminder of what was. What could have been. What had to end. Outside, Seattle rains. Inside, I paint. And somewhere between the past and future, I find my way forward. Alone. But finally, at peace. End.